Welcome to We Have the Power. I'm your host, Brian Gardner. Before we get into this episode's topic, the Federal Reserve, we have some news items. Welcome to We Have the Power. I'm your host, Brian Gardner. Thank you for watching this show tonight or during the day, whenever you might be watching it. The idea behind this show is to make sure we never lose our freedoms and liberties. And I will give you advice throughout the episodes of this show on ways to do that that won't take a lot of your time or a lot of your money. Today's show, we're going to be talking about a chapter in my book, Renaming Our Politicians. But besides renaming them, I'm going to talk to you about why it's important that they become more responsive to us. And I'll let you know a little secret. We are their bosses. And sometimes they forget that. Now, let's go back to the beginning of this country. I want to tell you a very interesting story that I heard. George Washington, of course, with his armies, defeated England. And he got a letter after the war was over and we were establishing this country from the King of England. And the King of England said, "Hey, Georgie boy, hey, I hear that you're turning the country over to the farmers and the shoemakers and the blacksmith. What are you doing? You won the war. I grant you that. You did good. But why don't you just declare yourself king or something? Why are you turning the power over to these lowly people?" Now, the reason George Washington got this letter is because the King of England had grown up in a situation where, because his dad's blood was in him, he figured, well, we don't have to have an election. I just get to be king. And he couldn't understand what the revolution was about, that in America we had set up a new idea that the people were in charge of their country. And the Constitution still is in force in this country today, but it has been whittled away with the rise in prices of running for election and other factors that have made it where the politicians aren't so responsive as they should be to us. And I think we ought to change that. Let me give you a couple of quotes that are very interesting that also appear in my book. And by the way, at the end, there'll be a little commercial that shows how to get a free copy of my book while my comp copies last. I have quite a few of them. And some other books that'll be very interesting to you. That'll be at the end of this program in about a half an hour. So Will Rogers, a famous person who would make commentary on all kinds of societal issues, said this: "We have the best Congress money can buy." And what he meant was that we didn't have a good Congress that money bought. It's just that money bought our Congress. And this quote as well, from Felix Frankfurter, who was a U.S. Supreme Court justice: "The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes." And that's what I contend in my book, that the power elite, made up of international businesses and other entities, are really manipulating things for their own ends, not for our interest, as this country was set up to do. Now, I'm going to read some passages before I get into some news items from this book that I wrote called Plan for America and the World. Here it is, and we'll show you a picture of that in a moment. And then I'm going to give you some news items, because I like to do that on things that have happened in the past, things that are happening currently that maybe you didn't know about, that are important, that I think you learn about. So chapter 1 in my book, Renaming Our Politicians. The power residing in the hands of the people of America is not simply a catchphrase. It was the desire and intention of our founding fathers to keep government and our elected leaders under the control of the proper authority and the true owners of this country, of any country, the citizens of any country. Currently, we call our elected officials politicians. And I believe strongly that they need a name change. We should make it universal that our elected officials go by a new name that fits better with the true responsibility they assume. The new name should be public servants. And any time that you write, see in person, send a text, send an email, start calling your elected official by the new name, public servants. And if you get a bad response, I love to do characters. "What do you mean you're calling me a public servant? How dare you? You ought to show me some respect." Well, here's the thing. You are showing them respect. You're not saying they're a creepy, crappy public servant. You're saying they're a public servant. They're also a senator or a congresswoman or congressman. But they are public servants because we are their bosses. And they must be forced to remember that. And I believe I've proposed a sound litmus test here, because if you get a bad response from your senator, state or otherwise, your representative, state or otherwise, they give you some bad response, They're probably working for somebody else. Don't re-elect them. Which brings us to our next major point regarding our public servants. The people of this country, like when England was running the colonies, have arrived at a time where we certainly still have taxation, don't we? We certainly do not have true representation. Because let me give a scenario for you. I'll go away from my book a second. I want to tell you this story. You go into your state or federal representative or senator's office and you say, by the way, hi, I came here. And they say, oh, it's so great when the people come into my office to talk to me. It's wonderful. What can I do for you? And you say, I don't want you to vote on that bridge, or I want you to vote on that bill, or I don't want you to vote on that bill. And they say, oh, thank you so much for coming by. I will certainly take your comments under consideration. And you leave the office after they thank you again for coming by, and they get on the red phone and they call their supporters who helped them get $50 million that it takes to be a U.S. senator. How do you want me to vote on that bill? How do you want me to vote on that bridge? And here's the contention. We have taxation without true representation, because how can you or I give them $50 million so they'll listen to us? They won't. So we come in, they say, oh, it's great to see you. They listen to what we have to say, and they get on that red phone and they vote the way their supporters are telling them to vote. That's why we need to take money out of politics. Now, you might say, well, the media makes a lot of money on politics, the ads, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to not let that happen. But I do have a solution to this. Now, I believe that this situation was engineered to raise the money to this obscene amount so that only the people that these corporations could give money to could keep being reelected. This country was founded on a system of checks and balances. Some think that limiting campaign contributions and the amount which can be spent to win any position at any level in our government is somehow unconstitutional. The proper way to view such a change is that it reinstills checks and balances. For the good of the country, campaign spending limits must be instituted. Now, how could you do this? Well, let's say you did an actuarial report. You did a monetary report. And let's take this fictitious state. And you said, how much money could the people of this state raise for the candidate they want to go to Washington? And they do surveys and they check it out and they find out, let's just use a round figure. Let's say it's $100,000. Now that is way lower than all of these articles I brought with me, where something like $80 million is spent, $50 million is spent, $240 million is spent. So let's go back to my solution. They find out that it's $100,000 for this fictitious state we're talking about. And they say, all right, you want to run for national Senate office? You could spend $100,000, so get a good pair of sneakers and get out there, because you're not going to be able to run $40 million worth of ads. You're going to have to actually go meet the people. Now, let's say that the people of the state raised the $100,000. This gets so exciting. And guess what? Their candidate won. John Smith or Mary Smith, doesn't matter. And guess what? Let's say it was Mary Smith. They send Mary Smith to Washington because they raised the $100,000 for her. Who is she going to be answerable to? She is not going to be answerable to corporations, because everybody could only give $100. That doesn't mean the corporation that has 2,000 employees, they talk them into giving all that money. That only can come from people. The corporation can only give $100 under my plan. So Mary Smith goes to Washington completely free of vested interest control. Do you realize what a change that would make in this country? Hey, honey, Mary Smith, we sent her to Washington. We raised the money. Now, when she gets back there, she knows exactly what we want because she had to go around and talk to us because she couldn't just run ads and win the election. She had to actually talk to the people that were going to send her to Washington. And isn't it a great feeling? She is in Washington and not one vested interest except for us can put any pressure on her. That is what I'm talking about. With proper campaign spending limits in place, the power of who gets elected is placed squarely back into the hands of the people of any state, the citizens of this country, or any country in the world. And guess what? This is the exact and precise location where this power should arrive. These kinds of monies would be limited so that people could actually feel that they once again have representation in Washington. Certainly, the media does derive a tremendous amount of income from the ads paid by the candidates running for office. But for the good of the entire country, we simply must immediately and drastically reduce the cost of running for office for the presidency, the Senate, Congress, state positions, and other governmental positions where the public vote determines the winner. Now, I know that people are going to have all sorts of reasons why this can't be done, and oh my gosh, it's going to be so difficult to do. But here's the thing. I believe that this could be worked out, and the only people who will stand against it are those that want to keep the money in politics. So when a senator goes back, they come into his office and say, you know, we helped you get elected. We're going to need your help on this bill that's coming up. Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, because you want to get elected again, right? Senator Smith or Senator Jones, you know. That is what we're up against. Now, the only way that we're going to see the money reduced in politics is we demand it. It doesn't mean you have to change your lifestyle, and you're probably having difficulty with your business because of COVID and you may be on unemployment. All I'm asking you to do is something for yourself. You are right now under a situation with taxation without true representation. That is tyranny with a capital T. So I'm saying to you, do something for yourself and your fellow citizens. Start demanding that the money will come out of politics. I can tell you something right now. There aren't very many purple cars around. But if every single person in Las Vegas said, you know what? I ain't buying a car unless you offer me a purple one. And if everybody banded together and demanded purple cars, you could go next weekend to an auto dealership and guess what? There'd be purple cars on that lot because they want to sell cars. And if they think people are going to buy purple cars, they will get them repainted or they will call the factory and say, send us some purple ones. The elected officials, the public servants want to get elected. And if we aren't voting for those that are spending $50 million, they're going to say, look, businesses, I know you want to control me, but I ain't going to get elected and I'm not going to do anything for you. There's this new wave that this guy, Brian Gardner, started. I hate his guts, but he lowered the amount of money in politics. So times are changing. We're going to have to work something out, okay? That's what would happen, but only if you and I take responsibility for this country, because after all, the condition this country is in, and anyone listening anywhere in the world, the country, the condition that your country is in as well, is somewhat the responsibility of everybody in that country, this country, whichever country. We have to take responsibility. Let's get on to some news items. I talked about the money that's just, here's Michael Bloomberg will spend $80 million on the midterms with the goal of flipping the house. $80 million. You don't think he's going to want favors from people when he gives them that kind of money? There's a score of other articles here too. Dark money donors make House seat main squeeze. Few behind election ad buys reveal donor data. Arizona Democrat narrowly wins Flake's Senate seat, and listen to this. The contest drew more than $90 million in spending, including more than $58 million by outside groups, according to the Federal Election Commission reports. Attack ads on both sides clogged the airways for months, spending millions of dollars. Democratic set pace in House races. Tarkanian has about $650,000 cash, $585,000 set aside, and she spent more than $725,000. Susie Lee. Now, talking about our elected officials becoming more responsive, Joe Biden, and by the way, I'm not ever going to call him president. I call him resident Biden because I don't believe he properly and ethically won that election. But resident Joe Biden declared domestic extremism an urgent national security threat in the wake of the riot. Well, what about the questions regarding your son and the money and the manipulation and the fact that you went on videotape and declared that if you don't fire the investigator investigating my son's murky dealings, I'm not going to give you this billions of taxpayer money. And guess what? The investigator was fired, and then Biden did give the money, but he has no right to hold that money up that is taxpayers' money because he wants the investigator fired that was investigating his son. Some other items here in the news. South Carolina did impose an abortion ban, and I personally stand against abortion, and here's why. And even people who stand for abortion probably can say, okay, that's why he believes what he believes, and that's why he believes that abortion is bad. I believe that life begins at conception. But the federal judge has suspended the South Carolina abortion ban, and we'll see where that goes. But I hate to think of life being killed. I don't like that. Mitch McConnell is a Republican, but he showed his true colors, the pressure he's under to get reelected because there's cost $50 million, $200 million. He stood by Trump until what I think was set up to cause Trump to get in trouble. I think people were sent into the Capitol who were not part of Trump. But this is what Mitch McConnell said. There is no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events on that day. And I disagree thoroughly, and I think it's terrible that Mitch McConnell went against the president and made that statement. There is a movie in the back of my book called The Firm. It's a situation where Tom Cruise, playing this lawyer, gets into this fancy law firm and he thinks life is going to be really good. And then he finds out from the FBI that his firm is the sole legal responsibility for the Moraldo crime family. He can't leave now, and they get dirt on him by sending a woman that they control to be with him. They get photographs with him, and then he's stuck, and he can't leave. And some lawyers tried to leave this firm and were killed. And I think that movie, if you look at it again, can be looked at from the viewpoint, this is what happens to our senators and congressmen. They come in, they want to do good things, and they say, come on in room 16, we want to talk to you for a minute. Now, it's great that you're a senator. I know you really want to do good things, but we just want to let you know that if you push too hard, you know, those taxes that you've been turning in beautifully every year, well, we might find something wrong with them if you start pushing too hard. And, if a senator says, look, get me out of this room, I am not going to do your bidding, then they make arrangements to either get a woman of the street with him, or let me give you the way that news reports are done today on someone they want to silence. And let me pretend I'm a reporter. News in today that Senator Smith possibly could have, maybe, there's an unconfirmed report that he might, possibly, maybe, have been with a prostitute. More news later. Now, that kind of reporting has not produced any facts. There's been no actual evidence. Remember, they said unconfirmed reports from a hidden source. And yet in the media, they have destroyed this senator's reputation. Why? Because they did not like where he was digging his heels into or looking into. You wonder why our senators and congressmen can't be responsive to us with these kinds of pressures? So we have to clean up the corruption in Washington, yes. We have to get the money out of Washington, and then we will be sending people just like our founding fathers hoped would happen, who are responsive to us. Because the real owners of this country are you and me. And we must never let that slide. We must take action to make sure that they are responsive to us. So call them public servants, write to them, tell them what you want them to do, and tell them that you want the money and the corruption out of politics. I hope you will join me next time. We will be covering a variety of interesting topics. We will have people in organizations who are doing effective work to clean up our communities, help our students study, stop psychiatric abuse, and many other topics that I hope you'll find of interest. We Have the Power is going to be on every Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific Coast time. We hope that you will join us again. We hope you'll spread the word, and most importantly, remember